How do I make a carburetor cleaning video interesting to watch? Well, give it a story. Better start with a question. What is the one maintenance item that makes bike enthusiasts around the world groan? I'm talking about carburetor cleaning. All right, on some bikes it might be valve adjustments, but depending on the length of your riding season, your local fuel quality in your bike, you probably mess with your carbs a lot more often. If your bike was on the road recently and it's just running a little crummy, a little carb cleaner, and you're probably fine. But what if the bike in question has been sitting for years? I know it doesn't look like much, but it's a 1979 Honda CB750 Super Sport. The reason I'm cleaning the carbs on a hoopty like this is that I want to hear it run before I tear it down and make something out of it. It's missing, well, a lot, but I'm gonna get the bare minimum together to get this thing to fire up. Step one is getting the carbs torn apart, cleaned up, and put back together. As far as carburetors go, these are far from the worst I've seen. They show only a little varnish on the inside, and they're not even really that dirty, but what they are is old. Over time, all of the rubber gaskets and O-rings on the inside harden up, get brittle, they crack. So I'm taking this opportunity to replace all of the rubber inside while I can. One last thing to note, in the description of this video, I'm going to link to a PDF document that breaks down this whole process in excruciating detail. I've been through a bunch of dual cam 750 carbs, so I'm going to skip a couple steps that I know aren't necessary. In this video, I'm going to refer to carbs 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1 being the leftmost one on the bike. And with a screwdriver, I'm going to want to unhook this spring here. So now that we have two pairs, we're going to take carbs 1 and 2 and set them to the side for the time being. And we'll focus on breaking down 3 and 4. First, we're going to remove the choke plates. These screws are tiny and they're made out of cheese, so be really careful not to strip them out. We're going to replace them, but you don't want them to get stuck. Now we can pull the choke shaft out and drop it in the ultrasonic. Speaking of which, you can already see how clean this top half of the rail is compared to the bottom. Folks, do yourself a favor and get one of these things. I much prefer using one of these to like a bucket of carb pit. You can see I've got a lot of mileage on this unit. This is like a dishwasher for bike parts, alright? The two carbs can now be separated, but be careful, watch for that little spring that's gonna pop out. And take that little piece of vent tube and replace it because it's gonna be rock hard. We're gonna do pretty much the same thing with carburetors 1 and 2. It's just that choke shaft is spring loaded, so you're gonna have to hold it closed while you pull it apart. This choke shaft comes out the same way. Just don't forget the little spring on the end. Yes, that is the same one we unhooked right at the beginning. Oh, and this fuel tee is held on with this little bracket on the top. Don't try to force it. To break up the monotony, maybe an exciting stunt or something. This is a bad idea. The interiors of all these carbs are essentially the same, so you can reference this breakdown part for all 4 of them. This yellowish, kind of brownish material, it's actually old gasoline turned to varnish over time. It's pretty gross. There's a little plastic ring in here that you're going to want to pull out and be very careful not to break. Finally, you can unscrew this little air jet shield and take that out too. Now we'll pull the air jet out. It is held in place with 2 little screws and has a spring underneath it, so hold it down with your thumb while you take it apart. Pull out the rubber disc and don't forget the tiny O-ring in there. Under the float bowl, you'll see the floats. Here I'm using a thin piece of welding rod, but any stiff wire will do. Go ahead and push the pin out, but don't force it. You don't want to crack a post. The float valve should come out with the floats. Next come the jets. These are soft brass, so be really careful not to strip them out. In fact, on these particular carbs, there's a third jet underneath this rubber plug. And I typically leave that one in place just because it is ridiculously easy to strip. Unless it's really gunked up, some carb cleaner and going through the ultrasonic will be plenty to get that clean. Finally, unscrew the idle mixture screw and make sure to remove the spring, the washer, and the O-ring along with it. Carburetor 2 has a bunch of junk stuck to it, namely this accelerator pump and a bunch of bracketry for the throttle linkage and choke linkage. Throttle cable bracket, choke idler arm, and the idle adjustment screws can be unscrewed and removed, and the rest can stay on the carb body. Where did you come from? Finally, 3 screws hold the accelerator pump in place, and it just slides out like so. From here, the carb teardown is pretty much the same as the other 3. And that's all the carbs torn down. Throw them in the ultrasonic and have a well-deserved break. So while we're waiting for the carbs to clean, let's talk about the bike itself. So this one is definitely going to be a budget-conscious project, but that doesn't mean we're going to lack in creativity. First things first, this gas tank is pretty nasty inside. It might be salvageable, but it would be a lot more fun if we made our own tank out of aluminum. I actually really dig this tail unit. I'm just gonna push it forward so it's a single seater and make it look the way that it should have from the factory. Suspension wise, probably just going to lower the front quite a lot and raise the rear on some taller shocks. To match the really low clip-on bars, we're gonna try to find a good deal on some nice rear sets. We'll remove these huge passenger peg brackets and come up with something ourselves. She's in good company, wouldn't you say? Okay, intermission over. Let's speed things up for the second half though. All right, the carbs are out of the bath. They've been rinsed off. They've been blown out with compressed air or carb cleaner or whatever. I'm gonna show you the assembly of carb number 2 because, like I said, the insides of all 4 of them are pretty much the same. First, the new air cutoff valve goes in. Remember to add that little O-ring. And it's hard to see here, but I'm holding the spring in place as I put the cover on. Flip the carb over, and now let's attach that choke idler arm. Assembly order here is the arm, spring, arm, washer, split washer. Rotate the choke lever to get it into place, then move the end of the spring onto this post. The parts on the top half can go back on now. Make sure that the ridge on that plastic ring is facing up. There's going to be a slot on the side of the slide. That fits the tab on the plastic air jet cover. Okay, flip the carb over again and install the idle mixture screw with the spring, the washer, and the O-ring. And you're ready to reinstall the jets. Remember, we left the slow jet in its dank, dark cave. And the secondaries I left in the emulsion tubes, so those can just be attached with a wrench. Put the rubber plug back into. By the way, if your rubber plugs are too dried out to stay in place, like these ones here, find yourself some wintergreen oil. It softens the rubber when left in overnight, and it also has a tendency to make it swell a little bit, which is exactly what we want here. The accelerator pump goes on next. Then the float bowl with a new gasket. The idle speed knob can be screwed in once the float bowl is in place. And finally, we stick the throttle cable bracket back on the carburetor. Now put the other 3 together. Easy, right? All right, so we got 4 assembled carburetors. Now all we got to do is put them together. Put the new piece of vent tubing on, followed by the metal rails with their new O-rings. Here's one of the parts where I differ from the PDF. I leave the throttle linkage adjustment screws in place. It's easy enough to just push the washer out of the way and get the tab in there. that, I don't really see the point of removing them. Now slide the choke lever in place and loosely bolt the plates on. Make sure that everything rotates freely. Steps for carbs 1 and 2 are pretty similar. Main difference is, do you remember that little spring? Make sure that that goes back on like this. And the end of the lever fits in like this. Then throw the choke plates on and rotate the spring like so, and prep for the next step. Now I do remove the throttle linkage adjustment screw for this step. Once the tubes are together, rotate the choke plate spring into its final resting position like this. Now we can bolt the support rails on and add the final throttle adjustment screw back into place. And that's assembly complete. Now, there's a lot of adjustments that still need to take place, but I'm not going to record it here. This video is long enough. I rebuilt these carbs because I want to see the motor run. I've heard it turn over, but that's all I really know about the motor. But the carburetors are the first step forward. I'm going to need a couple more things to get this thing running, namely a battery, the CDI igniter boxes. I'll have to install a throttle and then try to hack together a wiring harness. Okay, great. That's a good reminder to get the viewer to subscribe to see when the next part of the project comes out. Now do an outro thanking them for watching, but make it interesting so they don't click away. I suck at endings.